More on this, David Lewis from Corruption Watch joins us now. Good to have you with us, David. Thank you for coming in. Let me just ask you a more general question to start off with. Do you get the sense that we're living in a different era to that of the arms deal as corruption exposure goes?
Yes, I think certainly. I mean, the arms deal was, in a sense, the loss of innocence of democratic South Africa. I think it took everybody by surprise. I mean, by the time civil society started to revive itself, which, I think really happened, with significant exceptions like the Treatment Action Campaign, for example, which really happened around the Zuma administration. People were alive to the fact that corruption was on the increase and that something had to be done about it. There were some people who were alive to that fact. And it took, a fair amount of persuading to point out to people that if the public didn't oppose this crime against the public, then nobody else was going to. And I think that message has really struck home. And I think 2017 was the year when it really reached its high point, and the trick now is going to be to maintain that pressure, I think.
I want to ask you about what 2017 meant for you in a moment as an organisation, but first just tell us about what your report, The Time Is Now, demonstrates about how ordinary people are feeling about corruption at the moment.
Well, the report is in two streams, and the Time Is Now is about 2017. It's about the year in which people really threw off the shackles, if you like, and demonstrated their outrage and opposition to corruption. And some of this took part in the streets, some of it took part through organizations like ourselves and others. But in general, I think that what 2017 demonstrated, in the face of some extreme provocation and some extreme exposés, is that South Africans have not accepted that corruption is a way of life. And this has happened in many countries, several countries. And once you've reached that point, it's really difficult to contest it. And that's what 2017, I think, represented. That's why we've named the report The Time Is Now, because indeed 2017 was the time when people really pushed and pushed and pushed and ultimately succeeded in removing a really corrupt leader and led to the beginnings of the crumbling of the regime that he had set up.
David, let's talk about some specifics in your report. First of all, what is the most common form of corruption?
Bribery of one form or another is the most common form of corruption. It is everywhere, and obviously the scale of bribery differs from the traffic cop and the motorist and the proverbial cool drink to what we've seen exposed in the Gupta emails and what we've seen going on at Eskom and Transnet and places like that. But it's bribery. It's the exchange of some consideration for a favor done, if you like. And but as to the sectors in which it happens, yes, we're quite distinguished from other organizations in the effort that we make at exposing what is misleadingly called petty corruption, kind of corruption that afflicts people in their everyday lives. And schools have emerged. The corruption in the management of school resources have emerged. I suspect partly obviously because it's there to expose, but partly because people who may not otherwise be inspired to report corruption, when they see a kid's school lunch, or particularly their kid's school lunch, disappearing into the pockets of some teacher, headmaster, school governing body member, whatever the case may be, then indeed they do feel it's time to end this. So schools, health, policing. This year we want to mount a campaign, as we've done for the last couple of years, around schools, around corruption in the provision of public health services and in policing. And there the corruption is, somebody who has to pay the security guard a fee in order to get their prescription filled. And from there to major cases of procurement corruption and bribery. So these are very important, because I think it's where people make up their minds about the quality of their society, the quality of their democracy, whether they should obey the law or they shouldn't obey the law, whether they should vote or they shouldn't vote. these, you know, it's the corruption that defines everyday life.
So if you could advise the public on the most important thing we could do to stamp out corruption, what would that be, David?
It would be to continue reporting it and to continue speaking out against it and to continue taking decisions on the basis of whether you have a government that is willing to be held accountable. And it's really not a sort of limp-wristed approach. Obviously, you know, the pressure must be exerted to make the National Prosecuting Authority and the police do their work, government do their work, but that pressure has to come from people themselves. And the real danger now, and I think this happened in 1994 to some extent, is that people start to consider the battle having been won. And that would not only be particularly premature now, but I have a feeling that the minute you think the battle is won and that you don't have to hold your government accountable is the minute you start to slide down the perilous slope and land up where we landed up in you know, 7, 8 years ago. Not because I think that the new leadership are of necessity corrupt, but the scale of a power that public leaders and private leaders command is just seems too much to ignore unless people are really watching and exposing and holding them accountable. So that's our message, just keep up the pressure.